We're hosting this meeting today to help boost engagement in our proceeding, the long-term gas planning proceeding, also known as the gas OIR. This is a very consequential proceeding, and we're trying to pull out all the stops to try to improve engagement in it. It's somewhat complicated. That's part of why we're holding this event today, to try to make sure the basics of the gas system and how it's regulated are clear. And then there's also a lot going on, a lot of other actions coming on, both at the PUC and with our sister agencies, and we're trying to help people separate out exactly what's going on with this proceeding. These are not easy topics. They hit controversial and very difficult issues, particularly for some communities. We ask that people do their best to be respectful. We're trying to have a constructive conversation around these. We have a number of other open proceedings, and we're trying to keep focused on this issue, and trying to be topical and move forward in ways that benefit all stakeholders and all Californians. So anyway, thank you once again for joining us. I am going to start off with our quick technical note. Hopefully, most of you have some experience with WebEx by now. Here's a quick note on how to use it. You're going to see, basically, you can message all the panelists or all everyone present through your tabs at the bottom of your screen. We're going to be using this feature. We're going to be using this feature for Q&As. There's going to be an opportunity for Q&A after each of the presentations for clarifying questions, and we have one of our staff monitoring. Will be monitoring, so you can type your questions at any time as we go through the topics. We're going to try to keep the flow of the presentation to get through a bit, but then we'll have room to answer those questions at the end of those sessions. This will be followed by a session at the end where we have some more time, where we have a chance for input engagement on some specific questions related to your communities and how you think that the PUC can best work with your community. And then for some more Q&A, and if time permits, we'll have some open discussion as well. So with that, I'm going to get started. I've got about a 20-minute presentation here on which will give an overview of our natural gas system and how it's regulated. Then we're going to be followed by one of our experts on the topic, Jean Spencer, who's with our gas team. She's going to be talking specifically about the gas OIR and the topics that we're going to be tackling with it. So I'm going to just jump into my presentation here then. I'm going to be talking a bit about natural gas, so a short history of natural gas, how it was developed as a system within the country, and then I'm going to be getting into the present, what the system we currently have, how it's regulated, and then going to be outlining the challenges and opportunities. And this will help set the ground, lay the groundwork for Jean's presentation on what we're trying to do within the gas OIR. Sorry, a quick clarification. I know there's mixed levels of understanding here. OIR, I'm throwing out bureaucrat speak already, is the order instituting rulemaking. It's a technical term that we use. We can also call it a proceeding, but it's basically one of our actions for making policy around natural gas. Natural gas itself is not new to people. As of 1000 BC, we'd seen the Greeks construct the Oracle of Delphi over a natural gas seep for the eternal flame there. 500 BC, the Chinese were building bamboo pipes to transport natural gas to boil seawater to make it drinkable. And in 1626, the natural gas was first documented being used in North America. This by French explorers seeing native peoples around Lake Huron using it, and presumably have been used for quite a long period before they arrived. That said, natural gas wasn't put to modern uses until after the invention of the Bunsen burner. There were some uses for street lighting, but to really capture those thermal properties and use it for modern conveniences such as cooking, heating, as well as industrial purposes, this wasn't possible until the development of the Bunsen burner and then our modern pipeline system. So in many ways, we could see natural gas as similar to a lot of other systems that we're acquainted with, that were developed in, the technology was developed in the 19th century. A lot of these, if we see the small photo on the right, we saw destructive competition between companies as they competed to try to be the provider in various areas. They compete on price, try to put each other out of business. And then we saw abuse of power, in this case on the left with the Southern Pacific Railroad, which created a stranglehold over the state and was the reason that the California Public Utilities Commission, originally the Railroad Commission, was created. So in many ways, natural gas fits into a lot of other modern day regulated industries, such as electric. We are very similar to also water systems. Other systems, such as communications, have evolved. They were more tightly regulated. But as more competition has evolved from other services, regulation has been relaxed. This is similar with rail, where rail service to market is no longer as important as it was because of competition from trucking, and so our role has been reduced. We also are likely to see evolutions in how natural gas is regulated as our priorities change in the state. So it's important to remember in terms of going into this that while we are very acquainted with some of the downsides of natural gas now, up until recently it was seen as a very important amenity, very convenient to order and use as compared to wood, and certainly preferable to coal. It's still seen as preferable to propane. If we look at the experience from the San Joaquin Valley and the proceeding there, certain communities were excluded from natural gas, partly because they were somewhat remote, partly because they were also communities of color. So actually, important portions of important portions of regulation, such as obligation to serve, that the gas company has an obligation to connect people up if they desire to be connected, were seen as important wins for equity. And we saw some resistance, some suspicion from those communities, rightly so, that maybe they were being given an inferior alternative when they were given electrification. Changes in technology have made electrification more possible. Induction cooktops, heat pumps, these have benefits for indoor air quality as well as climate benefits as well. But there's part of the reason we're looking for engagement from community-based organizations is these are new technologies and people aren't familiar with them. There's need for training, and so we're working in a very new system here. So the current system, as I outlined in that early slide, we've established the Public Utilities Commission as a key regulatory body here. The gas company is a very important intermediary. They purchase gas from gas producers. Their purchasing departments buy from gas producers and sell this gas to the core customers. They don't get a markup on this. So while we call them a gas company, in essence, they're a gas transportation company. And some core customers have the option. So residences, businesses have the option of actually paying other people to call core transport agents to transport the gas. So really the gas company is about the storage, the transmission infrastructure, and this is where they apply to the Public Utilities Commission if they want to be able to get ratepayer funds to pay for these investments. And they make their money off a return of equity on these investments. Core customers have protections because the gas company has to apply. they can't raise rates without the permission of the Public Utilities Commission, and customers have the ability to complain to the Public Utilities Commission as well. Gas, some non-core customers, these are often larger commercial industrial customers, may go directly to the gas producers, and they may purchase directly from them. They don't have the protections of the Public Utilities Commission, but they sometimes have the ability to find better contractual agreements for themselves. The Public Utilities Commission itself regulates for safety. We're, unfortunately, very familiar with some of the issues with pipeline failure and storage system failure over the last couple decades. Safety issues can also mean that we have reliability issues. Lines may be taken out of service. And we may also, there's potential costs associated with these as well. Reliability is an important concept as well. We need to build the system so that it meets demand at certain times, and there are certain times when there's a lot more demand on the system than others. This drives system sizing. If the system isn't sized correctly, then there may be a lot more demand for gas than there's gas available, and this can lead to very high costs for the commodity itself, for the actual gas as people compete for that scarce gas. All of these can impact affordability for customers. All right. Important here to emphasize again is the gas company is not the one who's scheduling or delivering the gas. This is customers. You don't apply to the Public Utilities Commission or any other body if you want to turn on your heat or turn on your stove. Once again, the gas company is obligated to serve. So they as the current is, even if you were to electrify your home, and most of your neighbors were, if a few of your neighbors were holdouts, the gas company would still be required to serve your community. As core customers, residents and businesses, we pay a premium for more reliable service. Most of us don't need the stress every day of thinking where we buy our gas and what gas prices are going to be. Non-core customers, larger customers, arrange their own contractual agreements often. In order to make this work for their business, they often agree to conditions where they may actually be curtailed. That is, that they are not served with gas at certain times. And this has important implications for actually electrification. As we can see, electric generators may not be with gas at times when actually the electricity is needed for the grid. California itself is at the sort of tail end of a long network and not necessarily a large consumer of gas. This has some reliability and cost implications for itself. Here's more specifically where we pull our gas from. Any disruption in these transmission lines or at the facilities can mean that we don't have enough gas to serve our system at certain times, and can also lead to high costs as demand outstrips supply. The system itself is primarily made up of distribution lines. So while these transmission lines go impressively long distances, they're a relatively small part of the system. Most of the system is these smaller arterial distribution lines that sort of make the last mile transition to people's homes. They're also the primary driver of costs in the system. So you can see our revenue requirements for PG&E's gas business, as well as SoCal Gas's business. And you can see that almost half of the entire business is for distribution lines. You can also see the energy commodity costs as the cost of the gas itself, which is being passed directly on to the customers. In terms of sizing this transmission, in terms of sizing storage, we're looking at cold days. Winter is the biggest challenge for the system. Obviously, we can't plan for every single eventuality, but we do plan for certain events that are predictable based on the weather. So there are multiple standards, but here in Southern California, we're looking at the coldest day in 10 years. The coldest day, and that means that everyone, all homes and businesses will be served. Actually, all electric generators will be served during that time. The coldest day within 35 years, we're actually going to see some curtailment of non-core customers. So that's going to include some large industrial customers and potentially electric generators. Now, why, to touch back on this, why some are going to be curtailed at some point, it's because the sizing of the system in terms of transmission and storage is not large enough to serve everyone. And some of these businesses find that they can actually, it's profitable for them to find different contractual agreements as opposed to what is called a firm contract, which guarantees you service. Spot contracts can be, you can buy your gas day by day. You can look at longer term contracts where you pay a bit, you're going to probably pay a bit more. You may not be able to take advantage of decreases in prices. And of course, you can save a lot of money if your contract is interruptible. That is, if you allow yourself to be curtailed when supply is scarce. Prices themselves over the long term are driven by supply and demand. So while we see a lot of fluctuation driven by individual events, we can see the long-term pressure of the long-term price decreases coming from increases of supply a lot due to the fracking boom. But we have a lot of volatility, which can be locally driven. So in this case, we're looking at what are essentially national prices and then prices in the northern part of the state for PG&E versus Southern California. And these are disruptions due to restrictions on the Aliso Canyon storage facility. So we can see quite substantial fluctuations in prices due to that. We can also see fluctuations in price due to weather events. So this is Winter Storm Uri driving a spike in prices in Southern California. Storage is an important component of the system. We've seen that how lack of storage can drive high prices. This is because you can buy gas in the summer, use it in the winter with storage, and it helps you avoid going on the spot market when there's very constrained supply. And overall, it can improve reliability because gas is very slow. We have limited transmission capacity, so if you have storage close to where there's a lot of demand, it means that you can guarantee service during periods of high demand. So to meet our climate goals, we have some additional complexity thrown into the system. Renewables themselves are, and greening the system is one of the key priorities of the state and the Public Utilities Commission. It does create complexities and can create challenges in terms of cost and reliability as well. So, of course, solar and wind are carbon-free, which are incredibly important attributes. Because of this, after energy efficiency and just reducing demand, they're preferred resources by the state. They're also increasingly affordable. The challenges is that this is a term of art is dispatch. They're not dispatchable. We can't necessarily ramp them up when we want them. Every night we have the sun going down when people are going home and turning on their lights, and at the same time, we have solar going offline. This can be moderated with the wider deployment of batteries. So short-term batteries such as lithium batteries, which more or less can serve for about 4 hours, which are perfect to pair with solar. These don't solve the problem of winter, though. If you have multiple cloudy days, it makes it very hard to actually meet this demand, fill the batteries during these cloudy days. This means that often the gas system is increasingly called upon to fill the gap during winter time. The system overall faces strains as it tries to meet this capacity, as we try to fire up these these electric generation facilities, we called peaker plants, during these very short periods of time. There's also potential concerns on the reliability side too, because electric generators day to day aren't making much money. They have little incentive to enter firm contracts with gas providers, which means increased risk that they're going to be curtailed during a sustained cold period of time. The gas system is, so this is a sort of graphical representation of how the gas and the electric system are interdependent. So here we have Winter Storm Uri. We have the spike in prices in Southern California due to that cold, and we can see on that causes a spike for electricity prices across the state, as those electric generators are stuck paying more, and the state prices for electricity are determined at a state level. Overall, this means that we're currently saddled with a continuing reliance on transmission and storage infrastructure, and we're dealing with challenges in this proceeding of how to balance our investments in safety, along with the overall need to manage and reduce costs on particularly shrinking base of ratepayers as people potentially leave the system. Pipelines in California are relatively old. They're not cheap to fix, as you can imagine. So the OIR is giving a framework to weigh these costs. In terms of leaving the system, and I'm going to be another outline here, we're dealing with the issues of the obligation to serve. That's one of our important topics. And then how we start to prune back on the system itself. So we'd see with the thicker line being a transmission line, and the thinner ones being distribution lines, and the extra thin ones being service lines going directly to the home. There's homes at the end are fully electrified, so we can imagine that last portion of the distribution line could be decommissioned with potential cost savings for the entire system. We see a dual fuel home sharing that remaining portion of the distribution line with a fully electrified home. Because of current obligation to serve, that distribution line might stay in service until, as long as that home wishes to remain dual fuel. Further down, we see a distribution line which is connected to a large industrial user that has not transitioned and may have no near-term plans to electrify, which means that distribution line may remain in service for some time. We do anticipate some perhaps bigger changes in policy and some new opportunities created by new technologies. These are being explored in terms of gas alternatives that can use the current system with some modification, such as hydrogen and renewable natural gas. Also, another possibility to deal with the downsides of solar as well as wind in terms of variability. We can look at there's long-term storage alternatives such as pumped hydro, and then compressed air storage, and then there's and thermal energy storage, as well as potential baseload. So that means that just long-term resources that operate at all times, such as geothermal. So thank you. I think we've got a little, we're going to take some minutes for questions. That was a lot. So thank you for bearing with me for that presentation. John, do you want to?
Hey, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm John Baker. I'm in the News and Outreach Office at the PUC. I will relay questions in the chat. We had a couple technical questions that I hope I helped resolve. There was a question about recording this and will it be posted. I listed a URL in the chat for those who will be there. We have a couple questions. One's from Supervisor Dirks in San Benito County. They have a business that has been waiting for about 8 months to get a connection to a gas line. It will bring about 200 jobs to local residents, and they're unable to open the expansion until that connection happens. who can they talk to see how this connection can happen? And basically, who should they address their concerns to get it cooked up?
You said San Benito?
Yeah, so I can help them. I am also
Yeah.
the local rep for San Benito County. Supervisor Dirks, I will contact you offline and try and get you in touch with the right people at PG&E.
Right.
We have a question from Steve about what is renewable natural gas?
I'm going to Jean, do you mind helping me with that one?
Sure. So renewable gas can be, it's a gas that's created from some kind of other process. For example, capturing dairy waste is one way to create renewable natural gas. Landfill, methane, it's basically methane that would be going into the atmosphere under normal circumstances. And it's a way of capturing that methane and then using it for a useful purpose. So common places to get renewable gas are, as I said, dairies, landfills, wastewater treatment plants. There's also synthetic gas where people are actually creating gas. I don't know how that counts. Different kinds of renewable gas have different carbon intensities, depending on how much, because methane is a really potent greenhouse gas. So if you keep it from being released, if it's burned instead of released, it actually it's lower, it's got lower climate forcing. So there's different, CARB has different standards for the carbon intensity of different kinds. And so there are credits for different kinds of renewable gases, and the amount that you get per credit depends on how much you're reducing the carbon in the atmosphere. It was not super concise, but hopefully that was helpful.
Great. Thank you. We also have a question from Judith. Are you doing any research into low carbon replacement fuels like renewable natural gas and hydrogen to blend into the system?
Yes. There is a new, based on, there was a Senate Bill 1440 that asked us to look into creating requirements for renewable natural gas in the system, which I think recently passed. I think it passed at the last commission meeting. So that will require a certain proportion of core customer gas to be renewable gas. We're also funding some studies on hydrogen. I think the utilities are funding studies on hydrogen, and I think the CEC is also funding studies on hydrogen. The one that we're looking at is hydrogen can cause embrittlement of pipelines. It can make them more brittle, which obviously isn't a good thing. So we're working with UC Riverside to look at what the impact is on different components of the pipeline, because different components are made of different materials, to see what impacts hydrogen has. What proportion could you safely blend into the pipeline of hydrogen? For example, would it be safe to blend in 10% of hydrogen or 20% of hydrogen? At what point does it start to cause problems for the equipment? So, but there are various hydrogen studies going forward.
Great. Next question is from Tad. As distribution lines are decommissioned, can the saved and reduced funding be used to help transition remaining gas users to electric?
Sorry, because I'm gonna take this one too. So this is actually something that was raised by PG&E in the gas OIR, the gas rulemaking. I think this is a tricky question. I mean, on one level, it's tricky because obviously if you have, like it is in Southern California, where you have a gas company and an electric company, they're not connected. So those savings, you can't just use them differently within the company because the companies are totally different. So that's one problem. But even with PG&E, the way rate making has been done in the past, and rate making is not my greatest area of expertise. I know some things about rate making, so please forgive me if I don't have everything perfect on rate making. But in the past, we've been pretty strict that if we allocate something for gas, it needs to be spent on gas. And you can imagine, based on some of the previous things where we maybe allocated money for safety and it wasn't spent on safety, we kind of want to be sure that what we say it's going to be spent on, it is spent on. But then that can also create problems if and this is something we've been hearing from utilities about. Well, we have this idea that if we electrified these houses, we could not replace this pipeline. But then how does that work from a financial perspective? Do we want ratepayers to be paying for the appliances of this group of customers? Like, who owns those appliances then? Is it okay that they take money that was allocated for gas and they spend it on something totally different? And I know that sounds really nitpicky, but when you think about the amount of money that is approved by the California Utilities Commission, those are significant questions. I don't think they're insurmountable, but I think they do require scrutiny, and they do require thoughts from people who know more about rates than I do, whose specialty that is, to really think about, well, how do we track that money then? Like, if we're switching it from one thing to another, how do we make sure that money is being spent appropriately and ratepayers' interests are being protected?
Great. And a quick follow-up before we get to the next question. Someone asked, when will that UCR study that you mentioned be available?
I just had a staff member who works on that texting me the answer. It should be done in 3 months.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Bruce. Does the state's carbon neutrality, let me start over. Does the state's carbon neutrality goal, Governor Brown's executive order, imply that California is already committed to ending the use of natural gas, except from some peak electricity generation?
I think one question is, there's fossil gas and then there's renewable gas as well. So I think all that, there's on the electric side, there's something called the, oh God, I'm going to forget what it's called, the Integrated Resource Planning Proceeding. And, they still show gas-fired electric generation through, I think, 2050 at this point. It's not used that often, but it's still used. So I think that's a question. Is that going to be served by renewable gas? Because it's still shown as being needed for reliability.
Maybe one last question, John, then we'll try to get on to Gene, and we can hold some of those later, and we'll have some more time later.
Sure, we'll hold some of them. Then we'll ask this one from Judith. A significant portion of older rental housing is dual fuel, and tenants have no control over their HVAC systems or appliances. Can cities force property owners to make expensive changes which will cause them to raise rents? Is this being discussed in our conversations?
So I think, one of the things I'm going to talk about in my presentation is a workshop we have teed up for the end of March. And these are the kind of issues we want to hear from people about. I mean, we obviously know that this is a problem, but to kind of hear in more specific detail how people see this. I don't think anybody is planning on this at this, making those kind of mandates at this point. But I think rentals are hard. I mean, I live in a rental too, so I don't have control over what appliances are in my apartment. So it is a tricky question as we go forward, and one we're going to be talking more about.
We have a few questions we'll save for the next Q&A period later in the period.
Okay, thanks. So I will stop sharing here, Gene, so you can take over.
All right, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Oh, and thank you to the person who corrected my IRP description. Whoops, we always just call it IRP. All right, so, I'm Jean Spencer. I'm the supervisor of the Gas Policy and Reliability team in Energy Division at the California Public Utilities Commission. And as Chris mentioned, I'm going to be focused on talking about the long-term gas planning rulemaking, which it is overall interested in, how do we plan for this decarbonized future while ensuring safety, reliability, and just and reasonable rates during the transition. This is kind of a very large proceeding that's addressing a lot of different questions. So I won't be hitting every question in the proceeding today, but I'll be talking about some of the things we're thinking about in mostly in track 2. So just as an outline, I'm going to be talking about keeping rates affordable despite declining gas use. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the key infrastructure on the gas system, talk about reducing that infrastructure. I'm going to provide an overview of the gas planning rulemaking, and then zone in a little bit on track 2, which is the one that we're working on right now, and looking at some of the key issues there. And then I'll just touch on the equity workshop that's coming up in March. So a key concern of the gas OIR is keeping gas rates affordable, despite declining gas use or fossil gas use. So gas rates are basically the revenue requirement, and I'll talk a bit more about what that is, divided by the units of gas sold. And basically, if you sell fewer units and you have the same revenue requirement, your rates are going to go up. So you can imagine if the revenue requirement was $100 and you sold 100 units of gas, that would be $1 a unit. But if it stays at $100 and the units go down to 50, well, then you're at $2 a unit. So that's a very simple example of sort of the problem we have with declining usage on the gas system. So there's 3 main components of the gas revenue requirement. There's the gas commodity cost, which Chris was also talking about, buying the actual molecules. For core customers, for residential customers, that's a pass-through cost. So the utility passes through, they buy it and they pass it through at the same price. And so it's largely driven by supply and demand in the market. There's also infrastructure and customer service costs. And then there's public purpose programs like CARE, which is a program for low-income customers. It provides a subsidy for low-income customers, but it's paid for by the remaining customers. So in the gas OIR, we're going to be focusing mostly on infrastructure costs. That's kind of where there's the most control. And I know Chris showed this already, but I want to zone in on this a little bit. This is an example of revenue requirement. And if you look at it, so in 2022, gas commodity costs are pretty high nationally and internationally. So this may be, the 28% that you see here for commodity costs might be a bit higher than normal. But again, these are mostly driven by market prices outside California. You can see that public purpose programs are about 6% of the revenue requirement in this example. And the remaining things are the infrastructure. And as Chris pointed out before, you've got storage is about 3%, backbone and local transmission together about 8%, and then in this case, the distribution pipelines are about 55% of the revenue requirement. And because a lot of non-core customers, a lot of the large commercial customers aren't actually on the distribution system, and in the traditional rate making, that if you benefit, you pay for the benefit. So if they are not benefiting from the distribution system, they don't pay for it. So most of those distribution costs are paid for by core customers, which are sort of residential small business customers. So that's important when you think of how the costs fall on different ratepayers. So, and as Chris kind of already mentioned, as we think about cutting back on infrastructure, it is really a balance, because particularly if we cut too much backbone transmission and too much storage, we can create market scarcity, which would then in turn drive up commodity prices. So it tends to be easier to prune on the distribution side because it's less likely to have impacts on the rest of the system. So, and this is just kind of my little, I was trying to come up for metaphors for some of the key pieces of gas infrastructure and talk about transmission, distribution, and storage. So, transmission pipelines are similar to freeways. Freeways carry a lot of cars at high speeds over long distances, and transmission pipelines carry a lot of gas over long distances at high pressure. And similarly, like if you took out Highway 5, you'd probably impact the whole state of California, not just the towns along the 5. And if you took out a transmission pipeline, you're going to impact a large area, not just the parts right next to it. Distribution pipelines are similar to city streets. City streets have fewer cars, lower speeds. They impact the neighborhood that they're near. So if you take one out, like in this example, if you took out this big highway, you're probably going to impact the whole city at the very least. But if you took out, the street over here, you're going to impact that neighborhood. And it's similar with pipelines. So if you take out a distribution pipeline, you are going to impact the local area, but it won't necessarily. And there's exceptions to this. Are there things downstream and whatever, but you'll impact a smaller area at the very least. And so you did streets for transmission and distribution, and then I kind of was like, storage is kind of like a financial product in a lot of ways. It's kind of similar to having a bank account. If you look at this figure on the right, it shows supply and demand on a December day. And December and January are the coldest months of the year. So I'm purposely choosing a high demand day for this example. The blue line is the gas coming in on the pipeline. So gas comes in about the same amount every hour, 24 hours a day. But demand is not the same every hour. It peaks in the morning, it peaks again in the evening, and here it is again peaking in the next morning. So there's different kinds of mismatches between supply and demand. One of them is intraday demand, and I think of storage in that case as kind of like a checking account. Maybe at 7 in the morning you don't have enough cash, but you have some in your in your checking account, and you can just pull it out of storage and meet that little blip in the day. Seasonal demand is kind of like having a savings account, because as you can see on this December day, you wouldn't be able to put enough gas in during the dips to be able to meet the peaks. So you really need to have some backed up. You need to have some in the savings account left over from spring, summer, and fall to be able to meet your demand in the winter. And it can also serve as an emergency fund. An example Chris already mentioned is Winter Storm Uri, which was had huge impacts in Texas and some of the Midwestern states. We saw really high prices in California, and pulling gas out of storage was one way to mitigate some of those prices. Because outside of California, gas prices went over $1,000, when they're normally $3. So having storage can really help out during unusual events like that, if you have some in reserve. Okay. So I think it's important to note that the gas OIR, the gas rulemaking, is linked to building decarbonization, but it isn't a building decarbonization proceeding. And one thing that is also important in some ways, it kind of takes building decarbonization to the next level, because if you're looking just at greenhouse gas emissions, it doesn't really matter where you electrify a building. If you do one in San Francisco and one in Santa Barbara, it's the same GHG impact, and GHG impacts are worldwide. But if you're trying to get rid of gas infrastructure to reduce your revenue requirement on the gas system, it really does matter where you electrify the houses, because you need to electrify everybody on a certain pipeline to be able to get rid of that pipeline. So it has to be targeted. So, just to kind of reiterate a little bit, to decommission a pipeline, all the customers have to have an alternative to gas, and it has to be installed. And there also has to be enough electricity to serve them. So there's some parts of California where there are some local electric reliability issues where there's, they're maybe pretty close to the edge as far as how much electricity they have. So if you had a whole neighborhood electrified, that might be more than the electric system could handle without some kind of upgrade. So the building decarbonization and the gas OIR kind of have to work hand in hand. So, and what the gas OIR is really focusing on is what kind of criteria should we be looking at for which pipelines to target first. So it doesn't currently provide money for pilot projects. I sometimes think people think it does, but so far at least it does not. But we are coordinating with the CPUC's building decarbonization proceeding, which does have money for building decarbonization. And we've also been working with the CEC for the last couple of years, helping them plan the pilot projects that they're currently working on in Northern and Southern California for gas transitioning specific areas from gas to electric. And we will consider those in our proceeding. So it was a long time to talk in a row. This is an overview of the rulemaking. It was originally divided into 3 tracks. In track 1A, we were focused on reliability standards. Basically, are the reliability standards we currently have, are they the right ones? In 1B, we were looking at ways to mitigate the risks that gas supply shortages pose to gas and electric reliability. And we're going to have decisions in tracks 1A and 1B coming soon this spring. We've also already started working on track 2, which is looking at some of these longer term planning issues. So in January, we issued a new scoping memo specifically looking at track 2, and we divided into 3 sub-tracks. Track 2A is underway, and that's looking at gas infrastructure. We had a couple of workshops back in January, and we're moving forward with this track. Track 2B mostly begins in October, although we're having an equity workshop at the end of March. And it looks at safety, equity, the gas revenue requirement and rate design issues that I was talking about earlier, and workforce issues. And track 2C is looking at data and process, and that one's expected to begin in 2023. So in track 2A, we're covering a lot of issues in track 2A, and these are kind of the highlights. This first one is something we're going to have an accelerated decision on this one, and it's looking at whether the commission should require site-specific approval for gas infrastructure projects above a certain size, similar to GO 131D on the electric side, which requires site-specific approval for electric projects above a certain size. So opening briefs were already filed in this proceeding on February 28th, and reply briefs are expected on April 1st. So if you want to look them up when we send out the slides, there's a link here, and a proposed decision is expected in July. So I think this, is probably of interest to communities because it would give a process for communities to have more input into some of the decisions for the larger gas projects outside of the GRC. And the GRC is a general rate case, sorry. Okay, another issue in track 2A is looking at how to prioritize decommissioning distribution pipelines. And it's not necessarily an either or choice, but it's kind of like, how do we weigh these different thoughts, and are we missing anything on this list? So one way to prioritize could be on community characteristics. For example, beginning with low-income communities or disadvantaged communities where people might have more trouble transitioning to make sure they don't get left behind. Another characteristic could be savings. Is there a place where there's a pipeline that's about to be replaced, and if we electrified in that area, we could avoid having to replace that pipeline and save ratepayers some money? That's another potential characteristic. Pipeline safety is another issue. There's, as an example, there's a kind of plastic pipe called Aldol A that was put in a lot in the 1970s that has known safety issues, and the utilities are, as we speak, out there replacing Aldol A pipelines for safety reasons. Maybe it would be a good idea to try to electrify some of those areas instead of replacing that pipeline. And then considering of non-pipeline alternatives like heat pumps. So, and I just want to, point out that these don't have to be mutually exclusive. For example, there might be a place where the utility is planning to replace Aldol A pipeline. So you would be, and it's in a low-income neighborhood, and you could potentially combine all these things at once. You're saving money, you're getting rid of pipes with safety issues, and you're doing an early transition to a low-income neighborhood. That situation could be possible. Some other key issues in the infrastructure phase are thinking about what are the needs of customers who are likely to remain on the gas system the longest. In this case, we're not thinking so much about residential customers who might be stuck on the system the longest. We're thinking about industrial customers whose processes, tend to involve high heat and can be quite difficult to electrify. So how do we handle their gas needs, especially considering that a lot of times they provide jobs for people? What is the role of storage? How do we want to think about storage going forward? And, Chris talked a little bit about the obligation to serve. I put this picture in here just as sort of, to kind of bring it home. Like if you wanted to get rid of the pipeline, the gas pipeline running down the street, you would need to get everyone to agree to electrify. And if you had one or two of these homes saying, no, I want to keep my gas stuff, the utility at this point, the way that the law is currently understood, the utility is required to provide it. So you would not be able to get rid of the gas pipeline. So the obligation to serve creates a little bit of a collective action problem. So a decision in the Track 2A is expected in September. And there's a lot of things going on with that. Okay. So 2B, I'm going to go over that's a little faster since a little bit in the future. We're going to be talking about equity. What are the barriers to electrification faced by low income and disadvantaged communities? And what can the PUC do to address those barriers? There may be pilot projects considered in this track, but it has not been decided at this point. But again, the workshop on March 29th is going to be touching on these issues. Rates and revenue, are there strategies the CPUC should consider to try to mitigate rate impacts? There's concern about sort of generational impacts of the rates. If there's a lot of consumers on the system now and there aren't that many in the future, should we be maybe paying a little bit more now so that we don't have to pay as much later when there's less people to bear those costs? How should we be thinking about different rate strategies? It's focusing on safety, and how the commission should balance safety with cost concerns. And I think it's important to note that a lot of safety stuff is mandatory. There's, federal regulations and state regulations that the gas operators must comply with. And so one thing to think about is there any way we can align our state rules with the federal rules to kind of make sure we're streamlining and we're not doing anything duplicative? And then workforce impacts. How can we impact the negative impacts on the gas workforce? So as I mentioned, there's a workshop on March 29th. There'll be more workshops in October 2022, and a decision is expected in Track 2B in mid-2023. And the last one, I'm almost done, don't worry. Track 2C is on data and process. So basically, a lot of stakeholders want more data about the utility system to better, understand what planning decisions should be made. And there's also, in addition to the infrastructure itself, we're asking the question about what data do we need to improve our forecasting? We have a couple of, gas demand forecasts are typically based on, historical weather patterns and the gas demand that resulted from those weather patterns. And there's a couple of, and it's also based on, how much growth is there expected to be, how much new housing, there's a lot of factors that go into it. But as we look to the future, there's some things that are going to be different. Like we know the climate is going to be getting warmer. We don't know as much about how variable it would be. So we know on average it will definitely be warmer. But will we still see really extreme cold weather like we saw in Texas last year? How often do we think that's going to happen? And those kind of questions are important because the gas system is built kind of towards not a very extreme event, but a relatively, extreme event, as Chris was noting, like a 1 in 10 cold day, the coldest day in 10 years. Will that change a lot? It's hard to know. I don't know that we have all that information yet. And it's also unclear how quickly customers will electrify. At this point, we don't really have a trend line for it because everything's so new. So we're not sure how quickly that will happen going forward. And, just one thing that I think is worth noting, a lot of times people point to, oh, but, communities are passing rules that all new construction has to be all electric, which is great. But it is important to remember that I think there's 100,000 or so starts a year in California, and we've got 14 million existing residences. So, banning gas in new construction helps, but that still leaves a lot of existing homes that would need retrofits of some kind. And then process, as I mangled the description of what the IRP is, the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, takes a new look at the electric system every couple of years and creates a new plan for what is needed. So the question is, should we be doing something similar for the gas system where we keep reevaluating what is needed, and should the utilities, for example, be required to submit a decarbonization plan with a 10-year outlook on some kind of a schedule? You know, what should that schedule be? How should this be organized going forward? So this is my last slide. Just a couple highlights for the equity workshop. The first couple sessions are, you know, we want to hear from different stakeholders in different parts of the state, you know, from renters and landlords and homeowners. What challenges do they see to decarbonization? And we also want to look at, you know, as I said, different areas. You know, is it this, you know, it's going to be different if you're maybe in a really hot place like this, the Central Valley versus the coast, or maybe if you're in the mountains. You know, you might be facing different kinds of challenges. So we want to hear from different communities about how they see this. And in the last part of the workshop, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of some of the rate strategies that have been proposed to kind of prep a bit for the October workshop. So everybody's starting to think about these issues in more depth. And that's it. And I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, I'll go first with a couple questions that didn't get asked from our earlier submissions. First, a very basic question, and I think you covered it a little bit in the second part of the presentation, but what material are most gas pipelines made out of?
So it kind of depends on what size of a pipeline you're talking about. Most, well, I think all actually, transmission pipelines are made out of steel. And it's, you know, it's cathodically protected, which means it has various things to protect it from rust. A lot of distribution pipelines are made out of plastic, and there's different kinds of plastic. As I mentioned, there's sort of a problematic plastic that was used many years ago, and then some of the newer plastics are much better.
Great, thank you. A question actually was referring to the previous presentation, so Chris, you might want to be on this one. What percentage of costs are affiliated with distribution lines? They were referred back to a slide that had pie charts earlier.
You can see it, and Gene will expand if I get this wrong, but it looks like about, for PG&E, I believe the figure was like 48% of their costs on their gas side, and then SoCal Gas at 55% was associated with their distribution lines.
A question about pumped hydro. Is this something that needs to be built through private investors, or is it the state's responsibility? Are there any pumped hydro projects currently in the works?
Here, I think neither of us is an expert. I'm aware there's a large project proposed in Southern California, or sorry, in San Diego. I mean, how these get financed is they could be privately done and, you know, procured by the utilities, or, you know, I don't believe the state currently has any plans to finance or subsidize these, but we could, you know, they fit into our the IRP, so they you know, utilities could use these to meet goals in their plans.
This is actually a comment on the earlier issue of renters and transitioning to electric appliances. This issue is being addressed by the California Energy Commission in their targeted gas decommissioning projects, also by the Transformative Climate Communities projects at the Strategic Growth Council, and by the CPUC's own solar on multifamily affordable home projects. But that does spur a question from Emily. Has there been a quantitative analysis measuring the reliability impact of switching from gas distribution to electric only?
I'm not, I guess my answer would be, I don't think so. When you're talking about the reliability impact, it would be on that neighborhood. And I think it would probably depend on the factors in that neighborhood. You know, I know, and this is kind of why we wanted to hear from different people in different parts of the state, as you've probably read in the paper, like people in the kind of northern mountainous areas of California saw really extended power outages this last year. So if you were in an area where that was a recent experience, you might feel a little bit more hesitant about electrification because of the reliability issues. Whereas if you were maybe somewhere more central or somewhere place like San Francisco, that's got a lot of redundant infrastructure, maybe that would be less of a concern.
Sure. We got a few similar and related comments from Kate, from Tad, etc., about how the state is working with low-income communities to facilitate decommissioning. As customers go electric, get fewer gas units being sold will mean the gas prices rise as fewer customers have to pay for the maintenance. How are we working to try to work with low-income customers so they're not left with stranded costs?
So I think there's various, one thing that people point to often is the San Joaquin Valley pilot projects. So that's happening. The CEC is doing pilot projects, as I mentioned. The building decarbonization, I think, has some aspects of it where the money is focused on low-income communities. As I said, this proceeding is not actually a building decarbonization proceeding, but it would be is one of the criteria for areas that we want to prioritize. Is that low-income communities? And then, if that is our criteria, then we'd have to figure out the next step would be, okay, so if we're going to be are we going to be focusing funding on these very specific areas, not just in pilot projects, I think, but in a sort of more systematic way.
Probably is that also fits in a bit this question in terms of depreciation, right? And which generation will play is do we put more costs on now versus later? And in terms of issues of general affordability, those are being handled also in a separate proceeding. And
from my neighbor in Menlo Park, Tom suggests a decommissioning charge, such as they have for nuclear decommissioning, might be appropriate in this case. Something we might consider. Again, this is not a decarbonization proceeding. Carol makes a comment. There's some studies regarding gas pipeline leaks using satellites and observation. It's been fairly productive. Their question is regard to the capture of natural gas in landfills. How effective are those captures? Is that an issue even part of this?
So I used to have the renewable gas analysts on my team, but they have moved to a different team because my team was so large. So I don't know exactly how effective they are. I know that it is definitely something that's going forward. So I don't have a really clear answer for that. A lot of, in the recent past, a lot of those areas have flared the gas, so they're just burning it for nothing. So I think, if we could use it for something productive rather than just burning it, that would be better.
Yeah, in terms of the detector, there was recently the CEC recently had their working group had a presentation about in terms of detection, and they seemed to, in terms of detection and mitigation, they looked at landfills as well as the gas system. They saw as some of the key areas. Things are still pilot. It's the technology itself still isn't fully ready for prime time, but they seem pretty optimistic. Those were areas where they could get big reductions.
Just to give voice to a couple of dissenting opinions in the chat, GA points out that energy costs are already very expensive. He says it's more expensive to heat a home with electric as compared to gas. We should be investing in gas infrastructure, not decommissioning it. Another commenter, Derek, says decarbonization and gas decommissioning will be at the expense of equity and environmental justice, such as authentic wok cooking and Asian cuisine. Aaron asks, how do California Energy Commission responsibilities relate to CPUC ones? How do these agencies interact in this transition?
It was just because I just recently, perhaps you know of levity, I got the recent walk cookbook from Kenji Lopez, Alt Lopez, and he does not seem to be well, I have heard good things about walk cooking from someone who is at a building decarb whose wife loved the ability to clean up quickly after an induction one. You were able to get high heat and the cleanup was a lot easier because you could actually put down a towel. In terms of the wok hay, it appears that you have an issue. The gas gives you that more authentic one. But one solution suggested was an outdoor burner where you're actually going to get far more heat than your current existing gas stove, which means that you can actually do even better than you could do normally. So there may be a way to deal with that. Sorry, thank you.
I can talk about the CEC. So this,
yeah.
In general, the CEC does a lot of forecasting. They also do, it's called CPCN. I can't remember what that stands for, but they sort of,
Certificate of Public Necessity and Convenience.
Right, for, like new electric generation plants or different things. So they do those things. So we've been working really closely with the CEC for the last couple of years. And we're also, we also speak with CAR because there's the California Air Resources Board, because there's a lot of, kind of interdependency amongst the three. That we also have different jurisdictions. So there's some things that are outside of our jurisdiction that maybe are in CARB's jurisdiction. And, I mentioned as one of the informational problems was forecasting and what should we expect from the weather? What should we expect from, electrification? How fast is it going to happen? Forecasting is something that is really right dead center in the CEC's mandate. So that's something that they definitely work on. So we're definitely all talking and trying to work together and kind of trying to make our proceedings align so that we're working in our areas of jurisdiction in ways that are complementary to one another.
Tony has an important point. How do the obligation to serve requirements affect decommissioning analysis? Might there be legislation to address holdouts with dual fuel systems?
So I think this is a really, really important question, and we had a really interesting discussion about it I can't remember which of the January workshops. We had workshops on January 10th and January 24th, I think, and the report is on our website and the videos and all those things. Basically, what our speakers, their perspective was, and we had speakers from both legal experts in California and from New York, was that you might be able to get away with making a court case saying that there's not an obligation to serve gas specifically, but rather just energy, but that it would be really risky, and they didn't see anybody doing it, and they didn't see people making business decisions based on that, because all this infrastructure is so expensive. How much are you willing to bet on the court going your way? So they all really felt that it would have to be a statutory change or a statutory clarification. I do think it makes it very difficult to predict how this will go and how much infrastructure you can really prune at this point. I think it's very difficult to predict. And I know there's a lot of people that say we should come up with these very specific plans. And this is one of the challenges I see to that, because it's just uncertain how this will play out. It's uncertain how willing people will be to electrify. I haven't been able to read all the comments because they flash up on my screen and disappear, but I've definitely seen some people saying, well, what about housing costs? And what about, utility bills are already really high. And what about this? And I totally hear you, that those are real questions that the state of California is going to have to grapple with. And I think to a certain extent, the discussion up until now has been among people who have a real interest in decarbonization, who are very committed on climate change activists. But as this starts to go to a wider audience, if there's mandates, if there's different kinds of requirements, if the building codes change, a lot more people are going to become more aware of these issues and be thinking more about these issues. And I think it's unclear at this point where the public will be and how that will all kind of fall out as we go forward. Because I think there are real, there's real challenges. And, I think I saw the housing comment, and that's an issue that's definitely close to my heart as a native Californian who has seen housing prices go from being totally normal to, you know, being stratospheric? And how does this play into these larger issues that everyone in California has to grapple with all the time?
Yeah, I'll suffice it to say there's a healthy back and forth in the comments about gas versus all electric. I'll try and keep the CPUC jurisdiction questions in place. One commenter did point out, of course, as you mentioned, Gene, the issue of affordability in housing and how the transition to all electric would affect that across the state. Comments about emissions inside. Doesn't the CPUC have as much impetus to address health as costs? Questions about have we taken into account the environmental cost of methane versus carbon dioxide. So one question that we do have that's particularly relevant is how does the CPUC plan to address the issues of gas-fired generators being on interruptible contracts? If communities give up gas to rely on electric only, it seems that ensuring the reliability of these generators will be even more important.
So this is a real issue. And this is something that we teed up in track 1 of the OIR. And based on stakeholder comments, we definitely didn't come away with like, we didn't come away singing kumbaya on this issue. So one problem here is that the CPUC does not have jurisdiction over the procurement choices of non-core customers. It's not regulated at the national level, and it's not regulated by the state. So they make their choices and they have to live with them. So if they decide to take risks based on their financial plan, they can. And I think one thing it's important to note, the way that, the CAISO market, the California Independent System Operator, which, that runs the electric market in California, they make the rules for how that works. And firm contracts are considered fixed costs, and you cannot bid fixed cost into the CAISO market. You have to bid in your marginal cost. And so electric generators can't recover them in the CAISO market. But their actual gas that they use, that they burn that day, they can pass that through. So it gives you an incentive not to buy firm contracts, but to be in the spot market. And if the spot price of gas is $140, that gets passed right along to customers in the CAISO market. And not only is it passed along to CAISO market customers, to electric customers, if it's the one, so this is kind of complicated, and I probably will not explain it as best as it could be done, but the winning bid in the CAISO market sets the price for the whole state, or for the whole region. There's a northern part and the southern part. But so if you have one person who paid $140 for gas, and their bid is accepted because we're really tight for electricity right at that moment, everybody gets that same price. So instead of, it's not just you're paying the $140 gas price that one generator paid, all the generators, even like solar that's practically free to generate, is getting that cost, that price in the market for whatever period. It might only be for 15 minutes, but we've definitely seen times when that really made electric prices skyrocket, because the marginal cost, because the gas prices were really high and they were the marginal cost in the CAISO market. So that might have been kind of in the weeds, but it is a real issue. It's somewhat outside the CPUC's jurisdiction, but it's something we're concerned about. And we've been thinking about what levers we might have to try to address this issue.
John, maybe just do one more, and then we have a series of questions that also I think a lot of this, because some of these issues are going to be very local and regional as well. I've got some questions to start to get into that as far as like how to move on, because we're obviously not going to hash out everything today. So maybe one more question, then I'll pull those up and we can run through those, and that's going to give us a way people can type some feedback to us, which we can capture and use for our future planning for engagement efforts.
Sure. So just to summarize, again, there's a healthy back and forth in the comments about blackouts and brownouts of go too rapidly versus health. But I will close this out with this question. How does the cap and trade program influence utility decisions to decarbonize gas distribution systems, and how is it expected to evolve over the next few years?
So I can't really explain how it will evolve because it's an air resources board program, so I don't know what their plans are. But the gas companies, and I think I have this right, they have to pay for for the emissions from their system. So like from their compressor stations and the various things that use energy on their system. And then I think they have to cover the emissions of their core customers. And then the larger non-core customers have to cover their own. So, I mean, I would see that it would push them towards maybe making some of their systems more efficient to avoid some of the emissions costs. As far as their customers go, it's kind of their customers' decisions that would drive that, like how much gas they use. And there's probably people with more expertise on the subject than I have who are listening to me going, you're missing a whole bunch of stuff, and I probably am. But that's about what I've got on this.
Great, thank you. And we, just for reference, we do have one raised hand that's been up for a while. I know we're going to be moving on after this, but if we, for her reference, can we, Mr. Higa, can you open up Anne Figueroa's line so she can ask her question? And while that's happening, someone asked, where can we find information on the equity workshop?
Hi, good morning, attendee Anne Figueroa. You should have control of your mute unmute button.
Do you have that? Can you get the link? Could you drop that link for the equity workshop in the? Do you have that on you with you, Jean? Do you think you could drop that in the chat?
Sure. And Anne, you can go ahead and unmute again. It shows you're locked again, actually.
Hi, good morning, attendee Anne Figueroa. Can you either click the button to lower your hand, or I can unmute you again?
And for those who are interested in the equity workshop, Jean put the link into the chat.
Go ahead, Anne, you're on mute. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to get a clarification on, gas appliances. There's so many people who love their gas cooktops and so forth. Just wondering what you see the future of gas appliances being, and if people shouldn't be purchasing them anymore.
I'm not certain what the future is. I mean, I think, the state of California, its carbon goals would point towards people choosing electric appliances. However, there are no restrictions at this point statewide. There might be local restrictions. And I think I saw, I just briefly, as I was pasting down to the comments, I saw, someone mentioning, if there's a ban on new construction, that wouldn't necessarily impact existing construction, although I think some towns have actually put in restrictions on major remodels as well. So at this point, I think it's a hodgepodge of local regulations, and the state has not done anything statewide. The CEC has, I think in their most recent building codes, they were kind of wanting people to be all electric ready in new homes, but they hadn't gone all the way to saying they must be all electric. That might be coming, but again, that would be for new homes. And I think one of the issues that's really important is that, you know, retrofitting existing homes can be quite expensive. I think it depends maybe on, you know, I live in an area with a lot of older homes, so it can be quite expensive, in the tens of thousands of dollars. I think PG&E, they've done some sort of proactive decommissioning, you know, where there was savings, like maybe if they were able to electrify some homes, they wouldn't have to put in a regulator station or something. So they've done that on a kind of a small scale. And I think they've said their average thus far was about $35,000 a house. So that might go down in the future as this, you know, becomes more common and things become more streamlined. But I mean, I think it is a real significant issue. But at this point, there's nothing statewide that says you can't put in a gas appliance in your existing home.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up. We've got these additional questions. Invite people to type their responses to these in the chat. We're going to be gathering these. We're going to use these to inform our future engagement efforts, as well as some of these just generate some information on your local community issues. All right. So first, has your organization engaged on gas or electrification issues in the past? You see your organization getting engaged on these issues, and are there other organizations in your community prepared to engage on these issues? And with this, please type what, if you have an organizational affiliation you'd like to share, please type it here. Of course, if also type the name of other organizations that that you think would be good for us to engage in your community.
So I don't know if it would be helpful to read comments on this,
Yeah, John.
Hoping people would raise their hand and speak.
They're still coming in, but most of the organizations that have spoken in the chat so far, yes. We're engaging at the city in these issues. We're working with the cities, et cetera. So yeah, basically I'm seeing yes on all these issues so far. Supporting jurisdictions that are interested in electrification. Other people engaged on a number of projects related to electrification and transitions. Yes to all. Participating in a CEC-sponsored decommissioning study. Yes. So sounds like we have a lot of people who are engaged in gas and/or electrification issues.
That is really great. Okay, it looks like there's kind of falling off. People can keep typing if they want, but I'm going to move on to the next question.
I do have one relevant question, one comment that we might want to consider on the PUC standpoint. That's someone's pointing out we're likely missing regions who are only on propane at this point.
So I think we actually have one speaker at the workshop, the equity workshop, who's from a mountain area where your choice is basically propane or electricity. So I think we're going to be hearing from that at the upcoming workshop.
I did see a question. Do we have a website up for the equity workshop? Yeah, I don't.
I'm not, I'm not sure if it's been posted. I think information was sent around to the service list. Let me see if it's on our website.
All right. Go ahead and take it. That I'll move on to the second question. So question 2, what actions can the commission take to make it easier for your community-based organization or community to participate in the gas planning rulemaking and present your perspectives on issues under consideration? So a little more, perhaps a little more involved is the question, but important. Okay, someone's asking how to be part of proceedings. Yes, that's always out. We do from time to time present on how to be involved with proceedings. It looks like we have another +1 for doing that again. Briefly summarize, to become a party to a proceeding, you can motion. So there's a couple different. You can actually motion orally at, say, a pre-hearing conference, or you can essentially write us a letter, which says that what proceeding you want to become a part of and why your organization will be able to substantially contribute. I'll put my email address here. You can contact basically anyone on our local government liaison team. So in business community outreach, you can easily find our information online too, and we can assist you with that. Our public advisor's office can also assist you with becoming a party to a proceeding.
I will step in and agree that the public advisor is probably the easiest way to get involved. And you can just send an email to public.advisor, ADVISOR, at cpuc.ca.gov. And if you have the number of the proceeding, great. But if not, a general description, and they can help you get involved, find the proceeding, and get you involved with it.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I put the link to our proceeding webpage for the long-term gas planning rulemaking, which also has a link to the upcoming workshop. So that's in the chat. Excellent.
Thanks, Jean. Also, a further note too, if you don't feel like going to the full step of becoming a party to a proceeding, you can now comment that link that Jean shared. You can comment on the docket itself. We are now able to include those comments. We were able to use those. We were able to consider those comments. So that's a much perhaps an easier way if you wish to give comment on a proceeding. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. What are your primary concerns about gas infrastructure located in your community? There are some current concerns about reliability or safety as we potentially disinvest in the system.
So there was one question, Chris, which I think you had a slide prepared for that you were kind of keeping in reserve. They were asking who the commissioners are and whether they're assigned geographically.
Yeah, I can skip ahead to that real quick. Here are our 5 commissioners. I don't believe there are. So commissioners are assigned to proceedings. I don't believe there's any, I mean, some proceedings have a geographical focus, but overall, we tend to work statewide. In fact, the only units that don't work statewide are, or where there are field, or where there's field assignments, which our local government liaisons have some field assignments. Also Safety Enforcement Division. So in terms of people who are doing inspections of infrastructure are regionally assigned, but the commissioners work statewide, though their individual biographies might mean they have some experience in one more region than another. Just a quick note on our voting meetings and how those operate. So like most state agencies, we're bound by Bagley-Keene, which is similar to the Brown Act for local governments, which means that decision making needs to take place in the open. So decision making you can see what at the voting meetings is where they will discuss and debate these issues. They can discuss issues with one other commissioner outside the voting meetings as their Bagley-Keene partner, but the proceedings themselves are all the decision makings decisions take place in votes of the 5 members at the proceedings. And public comments encouraged, and we often get very substantial public comment depending on what the issue is. Some comment about safety. Safety takes precedent over costs. Yeah, that's, I think, been emphasized. That's a key issue that has been brought up again and again in the workshops. Question number 4. What are likely barriers to electrification in the communities you represent? So an example of this: need for panel upgrades, high upfront cost of electric appliances. People are very attached to their gas stoves often, and of course any other issues that you can see in your community.
I've been kind of scanning through the comments, and I saw one I can answer, which is, why do distribution lines take up such a large part of the budget? And it's because there's so many of them. I think in Chris's presentation, it showed all the pipelines in California. Distribution pipelines are about 95% of the miles of pipeline in California, and transmission pipelines are about 5%. So there's just a huge number of miles of pipeline. And I don't want to interrupt people from answering this question. Is it okay if I'm seeing questions I can answer? Should I hold off?
Yeah, if you want. I think if you're so inclined.
I think Emily Carlton asked if there are other jurisdictions dealing with these issues, and are we talking to them and looking for best practices? And the answer is yes. As I mentioned, we had someone from New York come talk at the most recent workshop. It was really interesting to hear his description of how some of these issues are playing out in New York. We've been talking to the PUC in Oregon. Recently, we've been kind of in touch with the PUC in Colorado. There are a lot of states that are starting to do similar things, but I think everyone's in a pretty early stage. But we have been trying to compare notes and see what other places are doing and kind of how they're approaching some of the barriers and challenges that we're seeing here.
Note about the costs of decarb in terms of upgrades. I believe the San Joaquin Valley pilots had some interesting cases of landlord, where they're coming up with agreements with landlords to protect renters in the case of upgrades. Didn't they, Jean?
My recollection was they had talked about, that some of the local organizations actually work directly with the landlords to kind of work things out.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that's an issue, on a wider basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see a question here. It says there is a fear that there will be blackouts, brownouts in the fall if we continue too rapidly. It seems sensible to look first at the greatest leaks, and those are visible from satellites. This is complicated because the effect on lower income people and focusing on the greatest return on investment is to reduce the greatest leakage. So I just want to make sure you're aware that we had a whole leak abatement proceeding and that there is a leak abatement plan, and the utilities are required. Again, I'm not gonna get the details exactly right, but they're required to reduce their leaks by a certain amount by, I think, 2025, and then again by 2030. So large leaks are fixed as soon as they're discovered, but smaller leaks that don't pose a safety risk were sort of historically kind of put at the bottom of the list, and the leak abatement proceeding require the utilities to clear some of the backlog there.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on to the next question. So this is an issue we've been discussing, and so we traded some feedback here. Is if you'd be interested in discussion on issues particular to your region in a separate forum, our sense is that I think we're gonna touch on this somewhat in the equity workshop. Gene, the question is whether we should look at other efforts, but a lot of these issues are going to be regional. If you're currently on propane and very remote, it's questions about electrification are different as opposed to if you're perhaps close to a transmission line, or in a relatively central location. So, and there's going to be anyway. This is going to also overlap with local priorities as well, and how aggressively and quickly local governments and others are pushing electrification. So there's just a number of complicated angles which we are looking for input from regional stakeholders. Looks like there's some interest. All right, it looks like there's substantial interest in there. We're going to be, our team will be, we're going to have some discussion now. We'll be looking to follow up. We've got about a little under 20 minutes left, so I'm going to move on to the next question. If possible, provide a quick summary of what housing stocks is. A little tricky one. We don't actually expect everyone's necessarily going to have, well, certainly quantitative answers for us right now. But if you can give us a sense of what housing stock looks like in your community, if you could please note what community you're representing with that answer, and then a sense of what is single family versus multifamily. Also, any whether owners versus renters, and then what a sense of when it was constructed, because that gives us a sense of how the electric, what kind of panel upgrades and others are going to be needed in order to electrify that community. a note on labor too. I think that's it's a very important one, is having sufficient people to actually do the upgrades is, you know, even if we have the money, is a substantial area of concern with. Right. North Oakland has affordable co-ops. The San Francisco Peninsula mostly before the 1970s. I'm also aware, in terms of Central Coast, the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, I think, is trying to do a lot of work on training so that we have people to do the work. Okay, only 2 more questions left here. Oh, an answer on Venice, looks like some detailed. Someone has the housing stock numbers and when they were built. Oh, I blew it on the renters versus owners one. So yes, if you have the renters versus owners numbers in your community, you already typed, we will consolidate those. Particular concerns for low income renters. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to our last question. Oh, so Santa Barbara is about 55% are renters. Michelle. Maybe people may be doing some research on the fly as we do this. If you can feel free, if you have information, I'll drop my email at the end if you have more information you'd like to be included, and subsequently you want to follow up. Please feel free to send it along and we'll include it. Oh, that's the last question. Oop. So that wraps up our program. I think we'll have some more. We have a bit more time for if people have questions. Got about a little over 10 minutes left. Are we seeing any more questions there, John?
Yeah, a question just came in. Where is the information on the last part about community engagement? Where's that going within the PUC?
Oh, about community engagement in terms of our unit?
Yeah, they're asking who will use that information, I believe.
I mean, that would be in terms of what organizations we want to be engaged. That would be used by.
Yeah, the information that we just took in the questions, who's going to be using it here?
That's going to be us. That's going to be between business and community outreach and CPUC's executive division, and then gas and reliability teams of Gene's units. They'll be used by CPC staff.
A question from Debbie about will there be a recording available? Yes, there will be a recording available. I will find the link. It was posted earlier and posted again in the chat so we can find it more quickly. Question from Carol about biodigesters. How efficient are they? Does anyone know?
My RNG expert has been texting me. I'm waiting to see if she'll send me some. I don't know if she's still on. Let's see. She says the digester leak rate is approximately 3%. So I'm assuming that's the methane leak rate. So 97% not leaking, compared to it all going into the air without. She says it's more. She was texting me about the landfill, and I didn't have. We'd already moved on. She said that the dairy ones are more efficient than the landfill digesters, collection systems.
So far, that's all the questions. We have a comment from Bruce who says they'd like to see outreach like this to young people under the age of 18. The Sunrise movement can help put this together, and it's important that their voices be heard.
Okay. Do we have your contact? Well, we should have your email address from your registration, Bruce. So we will follow up and connect.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that. So for this proceeding, we really wanted to do more with public engagement than we have in the past, and that my team reached out to, the community and business outreach team, and they've been really super helpful. But we are kind of, I don't know, we're not exactly starting from scratch. There's definitely things that have happened in the past, but we're trying different things and new things, and. I know people wouldn't be surprised to know this isn't necessarily been the CPC's best aspect in the past. So we are learning, and we do really appreciate your suggestions. And we're learning by doing right now, trying to figure out what works and what's helpful to people, and how to hear from more different kinds of people as we move forward with this proceeding. So thank you for all your feedback.
A couple of questions thanking us for the information and the approaches that we're taking. Got a good effort.
Thanks. We appreciate that. Yeah, more lead time is good. Yes, we're aware. We're trying to get better at these things too. It's as much as it's. Yeah, we're aware. We try to do better, especially the restrictions that community-based organizations face in terms of scarce resources and a lot of very important other priorities, and that's something that's front and center, especially for our engagement team. That engaging with this, everyone has a job besides has other important responsibilities. We're doing our best to avoid those conflicts and do better in terms of giving earlier notification. Anyway, but with that, I would say we don't have any more program here. If people want to keep typing comments or have a few extra questions, we're happy to take those. But otherwise, thank you everyone very much for your time today. We really appreciate the discussion and the chance to talk a bit about these issues and answer your questions. And we hope that we can stay engaged. I think it's someone said repeating a question about gas info reporting about levels of gas leakage all along pathway. I think currently a lot of this work is modeled, right, Gene? But then the goal is to move to actually directly monitored.
So there is, there's certain requirements, like the utilities have to walk their pipelines, X number of times a year. They've also, invested in things like, the cars that drive by and can monitor. NASA's done those flights, and I think they communicate that language, or not that language. They communicate the results to the relevant emitters. It's not always utilities; it can be the landfills or the dairies or whatever. And I know that there's also some, independent entrepreneurs that are collecting this information as well. As I said, we do have the leak management proceeding. I think gas system leaks are definitely part of the methane leaks in California, but they're a relatively small part compared to like the landfills and some of the other emissions sources.
We do have a question about, will the slide decks be posted along with the recording?
Yes.
We can do that. Yep. I had someone sent me a question about if we can access those monitoring efforts. I think that I was just on this work group that the CEC had a while back. There was a company that was handling this. I don't believe that. I don't know if that data is currently online. There was those NASA did those flyovers. There was some data from that, but it wasn't comprehensive.
Yeah, and we have the leak abatement proceeding is closed. I can try to find the number. Although the utilities are also required to submit reports. Can't remember the exact time schedule. I think we just got one recently. So those are probably publicly accessible, but not necessarily obvious to find. I'll see if I can dig up that number, and that might be helpful.
Yeah, I think the answer there was that real-time leak data is not currently available, but there are entrepreneurs working to make that available. I don't know if it's going to be publicly available, but it will become available for companies and regulators, and I guess then at a very minimum available through a public records request. Seeing any more questions, John, or I think we can hold on to the line until the.
I do not see any new questions, but yeah, I do not see any new questions.
Okay, well, we can just hold on the line for a couple more minutes, and then hopefully everyone's.
So I did find the decision numbers, and it looks like SoCalGas just recently submitted an advice letter with some of their leak abatement costs. So you could start with those if you were really interested in it, and I can try to do a little more digging.
This maybe new terminology. Advice letter is a mechanism we use short of having sort of a new decision. So it's allows a certain amount of informality in our outside formal commission decisions where there has to be a vote, where we can have regulated entities can submit information or get feedback on particular actions. And some of these can be taken care of at the staff level. Some rise to the level of requiring a new vote from the commission. Well, I think we're ready to wrap up. I think probably everyone has more important things now, such as lunch. Thank you again for all your time today. And if you need to provide us, any additional feedback, we drop the link for our business and community outreach team here.
Yes, and thank you. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, so I appreciate all the people who took the time to come and have this discussion with us today.
Thanks, Michelle. All right. Thanks a lot, Jean. Thanks a lot, John, for helping. Thank you, Hope. And thank you very much to Joseph, who made sure that everything flowed seamlessly, more or less. So I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.